Is it working? It's working.
All right. So thank you for indulging me with my little, Star Wars geek fest there at the beginning. It's really funny, and you apologize for the clumsy segue into Mishnah, but Star Wars did a very good job for my generation of providing a basic framework of spirituality that allowed people who were not fans of organized religion to still think about the universe and the world with a layer that they couldn't see, they couldn't touch, but that was important and that had impact on the world. And for many of them, myself included, as they grew, that basic vocabulary of we are luminous beings and the force guides my destiny and that kind of stuff eventually evolved into a more mature Jewish understanding of God and religion. So I don't know if George Lucas did that on purpose. I don't think he did. I think he was taking it the other direction. But for many people who were coming with little, it helped them make that bridge into a more...
Actually, you can see a lot of the Tanakh they are in Star Wars. For example, everything starting in Midbar.
Yes.
Yeah. And they are one person alone, lonely, and suddenly saw the light. There's a lot of connection with the Tanakh.
And the dynamic between father and son over and over. Yes, absolutely. And the notion of what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a bad person? Standing up to evil. I mean, it has many of the classical biblical themes, of course. That's what makes it a good story.
So you see, you can do a newsletter about Star Wars and the Judaism.
Well, actually, I did a sermon on a Friday night a few weeks ago on exactly that point. It was a shorter one, but I could do a longer one. Absolutely. And especially there are a few places where Star Wars and Judaism don't agree. But we'll talk about that some other day. Because right now we have to talk about the nitty-gritty, right? Because the one thing that Star Wars didn't prepare people for, follow the segue, didn't prepare people for was how to celebrate Pesach, right? And by that, I don't just mean that it's celebrated, but the details of how it's celebrated. So we're going to finish up chapter 4, which has a little detail, and then we have some interesting, an interesting digression, and then we're going to hopefully hit chapter 5 tonight. And chapter 5, you're going to have to roll up your sleeves because it's going to get messy. Because after all, what's the centerpiece of the Passover celebration? A dead sheep, right? And that means we're going to be up to our elbows in blood. And it's maybe a little different than what you're used to. It's going to be a lot more detailed, probably, than you're used to thinking about your Passover preparation. You thought dusting was hard. Yeah. But as they say, God is in the details. And we're going to see a lot more examples of the intention of the action being important and the mindset of the person doing it being important. So let's just finish up chapter 4. Like I said, we've got one more nitty-gritty, then some digressions, and then chapter 5 we'll get into our elbows. All right, so we are on chapter 4, Mishnah. Pardon the announcement. We are on chapter 4, Mishnah number 7. So it'll say at the very top, Pesachim, chapter 4, Mishnah 7. And we are finishing up with our topic of work on the 14th of Nisan. You remember from last week's class that work gets postponed, depending upon local custom, at an earlier time on the 14th. That is to say, the day of the, I'm trying to remember how to say this in English. Right, it's the day before Pesach, but the problem is we got to remember Judaism. That means the nighttime of this day is the Seder, right? So the 14th is the daytime leading up towards the Seder. And so we cut work short, and that means we have to talk about what work can or can't you do during this lead-up time to Passover in the evening. Make sense? Good, we all remember this. We're on the same page. Chapter 4, Mishnah 7. I need a volunteer to read. Now, chapter 4, Mishnah 7. Are you in the right packet?
Chapter 5.
You went too far. Yeah, back up a little bit if you're chapter 5, Mishnah 1. There we go. Chapter 4, Mishnah 7.
Oh, it's very small.
Yeah, sorry, small print, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There were formatting issues. Okay, so Harry, I don't know if you're planning to read. You've always been a wonderful volunteer to read. So we're only reading out loud, although you are welcome to read the wonderful commentary from the conservative movement that surrounds it. But we're only reading out loud the section in the middle where it says Mishnah 7, and then they've conveniently broken it into pieces to help make conversation about each line easier. So
this is the work that's permitted on that day? Is that what we're talking
about? Well, we are actually talking about what's permitted, but with some variations in it. So yes, this is as I said, the details that you don't get in Star Wars.
Mishnah 7. 1. They may set up chicken houses for fowls on the 14th.
All right, so this is setting up like a little hut, a coop for the chickens to go into to lay eggs.
And if a fowl ran away, one may return her to her place.
Right, so you can then that's considered work, but it's important to take care of the animal and make sure that it's there.
And if she died, one may set another in her place.
All right, now putting another in her place is twofold. One, it means that other chicken will have a nest and therefore will lay eggs. And two, if there already are eggs, it means that other one will sit on the eggs and incubate them, keep them warm. Make sense? Okay.
Second, they may sweep away the manure from under an animal's feet on the 14th, but on the festival, one may only move it to the side.
Isn't it fun to be a farmer?
Oh,
right. So you can remove it completely on the day leading up to. That is to say, to pull it out from the stall or the pen completely. Whereas on the day of the Chag itself, you can only push it to the side. You can't haul it out of the pen and put it in whatever your dung pile is. You can just move it a bit to make a clean area for the animal to be in. Does that make sense? Again, we're all farmers.
So we are talking about what's lost.
We're talking about what is permitted, even though you might have thought because it's work-ish that it shouldn't be. So remember, we went through this whole discussion of can you work, can't you work, local custom, non-local custom, and stop work early. And Mishnah 7 comes to say, but there are a few things that you are allowed to do, even though they are workish.
like if your chicken ran away, go get it and bring it back.
Right.
That's okay.
That is permitted, exactly. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And again, the main thing to take away from this is be thankful you're not a farmer. It's hard work, especially pre-industrial.
They may take vessels to and bring them back from a craftsman's house, even if they are not required for the festival.
Remember, we're not talking about on the festival. We're talking about the 14th, right? The day before, leading up towards the evening. And you might think, dropping something off at the craftsman or picking it up from the craftsman, well, isn't that just part of work? And they're saying, no, that doesn't count as work enough to be limited on this pre-holiday day when we have this work slowdown. Right? So it's the issue, and we see this in a number of rabbinic topics, is there is a rabbinic extension, a protection to change the way we do things in order that we celebrate what the Torah has asked us to do properly. Right? So we light candles earlier than we technically have to in order to make sure we don't accidentally step across the line. Right? We take greater care to remove the blood from meat than technically we have to in order to make sure that we don't accidentally cross the line. We stop work early in order to make sure we don't accidentally forget to do everything we need to do and to prepare for the Passover Seder properly. Even though technically we could have left it to the last minute. And that means that we've now got a prohibition in place that is a precautionary prohibition. Too many P's there. A precautionary prohibition. But for some things, we need to make exceptions to the precaution in order that it not become too onerous, that it not become counterproductive, right? So you extend a protection, you extend a precaution, a prohibition further than was originally demanded, and then you make a few exceptions to what you just extended outwards. Does that make sense? Okay, so I won't hunt for another metaphor. Good. So with that in mind, we now have to look at other cases where people do things that are kind of on the fence of right and wrong. And we're going to see an example from the world of Jericho. which is the city, down by the valley of the Jordan, and see that they did some things which were okay and some things which were not okay. And these are general things, not Passover things, but general things. Okay.
One they talk about is specifically about Jericho.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Jericho was always considered a little bit of an exception because it existed in a different, what's the word? Biome. That's the word. Like an environmental setting, right? It wasn't like part of the coastal plains. It wasn't part of the hills. It was this unusual oasis town that existed in its own way in this valley. And so often it had unique rules or unique customs that were unique. It had rules or customs that were unique to it. And therefore, the rabbis sometimes will point out there are things they do in Jericho that are different than anywhere else they're going to see. And it had a very long tradition. It was an inhabited town from long, long ago. But, as I remember correctly, Jericho is still the oldest inhabited city on earth. That is to say, it is the city that currently has people living in it today that we know for a fact people lived there 5,000 years ago.
That's cool.
Yeah. And there's no other city that we can say absolutely confirm that has been a spot of human habitation. I mean, who knows about different beaches and valleys or whatnot, but Jericho, we have concrete, we have stone evidence that people have been living there from primitive times, from prehistory times, all the way into the modern time, with only some brief absences, give or take some destructions, some of which we know about and others that occurred at other time periods. Okay, so Jericho is unique, and we're on Mishnah 8.
This Mishnah relates.
Go down to where it says Mishnah 8.
Oh, Mishnah
we don't
8,
need the
sorry,
intro.
right.
Well, you can read the intro, but
Right.
not out loud for
Right,
us.
so
Yeah.
6 things the inhabitants of Jericho did. Against 3, they, the sages, protested, and against 3, they did not protest.
All right. So wonderful dynamic to notice a few things here. So the inhabitants of Jericho have their own customs. They have their own way of doing things. 3 of them, even though they are different than what other people do, the sages, the Chachamim, that means like the rabbinic cadre, the teachers and sages of the community, said, yeah, you know what? It's different, but it's okay. 3 other things they did, the sages went, it's different, and they really shouldn't be doing that. But they did it anyway.
Oh.
All right, so this is partly pointing out that there has long been a tension, in case you didn't already know, between what the rabbis teach and what communities do.
But the rabbi didn't say that tradition is more important over law. So if the custom of the community is in some way, they're respected. So now why they want to change now a custom of the community?
So the custom of the community is very important when the law allows for multiple options. But if the law is don't and they do, or if the law is do and they don't, custom doesn't get to override that, right? So if the custom in a community was that it's okay to punch each other in the face. That's just the way we do things here, right? It's we're a rough and tumble kind of community, and yeah, good fist fight, no problem. The rabbis say no, you don't get to make that a custom. You don't get to make that a custom. The custom here is, bacon is so tasty, let's have some. You don't get to make that a custom. Even if people have been doing it for 100 years, it doesn't become the local custom, minhag hamakom, and therefore it's okay. It's still wrong. But this idea of protesting or not protesting comes up quite a lot in rabbinic talk, because there are some times where they say, you know what, we'll let it slide. It's not really what we would have recommended, but it's okay, so they don't protest. And not protesting, very important concept for life in general, not protesting in the face of someone else's action is tacit consent. Right? So if you see somebody doing something that you think is wrong, you have to find some way to object. Doesn't have to be running over and grabbing them and pinning them to the ground with handcuffs, unless you're a police officer, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. But there are ways to object. We talked about Tochachat 2 weeks ago in the Torah class last Wednesday, of rebuking people when necessary. And sometimes it's simply a matter of protesting to yourself or to others, even if you can't have any say so on the person that's doing the action. But letting something go that's wrong without voicing that it's wrong, that means you approve. And so the rabbis were very clear that they needed to speak up when they witnessed something that was wrong. So 6 things, 3 that are okay, 3 that are not.
These are those things against which they did not protest. First, they grafted palm trees all day on the eve of Pesach.
Right? They grafted palm trees. This is one of those great agricultural activities of getting the palm trees to grow. And they allowed them to do this. If you've ever been to Jericho or through the Jordan Valley anytime in recent memory, you'll know that it is still a huge area for palm trees. The dates and all the palm trees down there are just lining the roads. And this was the time for this work. And if they didn't do it, the entire economy of the region would be destroyed. So basically, they allow an exception for them to go ahead and do the grafting, even though if it were somewhere else and under less strenuous circumstances, they would have said don't. So they made it this exception.
But on the next day, when it is Pesach, then they can't do it.
Absolutely not.
Doesn't matter anything about the economy or anything else.
Right.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, when it's Chag, it's Chag. But remember, as I said this in the last Mishnah, they extend a prohibition out, and now they have to walk back a few exceptions for extenuating circumstances. And this is an example of that.
Second, they wrapped up the Shema.
Yeah. So this one gets a lot of commentary of what does it mean to wrap up or to cut. One version means that they didn't say the Baruch Shem Kavod, the line that comes between the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, and others that they did it a bit more expeditiously, that they didn't leave proper gaps and spacing between the words where the sages would have liked, but they kind of said it all very quickly, and so there wasn't really a lot of pausing between the words, and you couldn't really tell where one word began and one word ended. Now that may sound like, well, that's the way I hear everybody daven. But the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, the Shema and its surrounding blessing, its surrounding text selections are specifically spelled out as not being said in that manner. That although, yes, other prayers we can say more fluidly, to be diplomatic, these particular textual pieces are meant to have good pauses in between the words so that we don't make mistakes in what we are saying. So they nevertheless either left out the line, the Baruch Shem Kavod, or they ran the words together a bit more, and the sages went, it's not best, but it's okay. And?
They harvested and stacked their produce before the bringing of the Omer. And for these,
that's okay. Go ahead and do that.
For these, they did not protest. So they were okay. They're harvesting and stacking the Omer.
Okay.
That was okay.
So remember, the Omer is the barley harvest that begins at the holiday of Pesach. Exactly right. And you're not allowed to eat from that until the offering has been made at the temple. And for most of the country, the law was you don't even put sickle to stalk until the sacrifice at the temple has been done. But for Jericho, they didn't eat, but they did gather prior to the sacrifice of the Omer being conducted at the temple.
Also because it related to the economy?
I've not really seen a great explanation of why. There are some that say yes, that it was related, but I haven't found a compelling explanation. So, but yes, that is the basic idea, that there was a local variety or a local version of their wheat, and that was why they were allowed to make those exceptions. But in any case, they had a unique thing. Are you looking for an extra copy? That one is. Okay. But there were 3 things they did, just in case you think the rabbis are pushovers, that the sages said, we're not having this. Of course, they did it anyway, but at least they protested.
And these are those against which they did protest. They permitted for use the small branches of sycamore trees belonging to sacred property.
Ah. Okay, so here's a wonderful case in self-rationalizing logic. Ancestors within the town of Jericho would consecrate these trees, right? And say, this tree is consecrated for temple. And that, of course, means the tree is off limits for anything other than temple purposes. But, say the people of Jericho, let's see how good my art can do here. That's really a terrible tree.
Yeah.
It's not a palm tree. It's a sycamore.
Oh,
See, there we go. All right, so there's my sycamore tree. And this whole sycamore tree has become consecrated to the temple. Good? Good. But either there are small branches that nobody really uses, or there are new branches that are growing. Well, those aren't consecrated, right? Well, it depends on your reason. So if it's talking about small branches that were there at the time of the consecration, then nobody uses them, so why would I have dedicated them? I can't dedicate a pig to the temple. So clearly I would have only meant, when I said I'm dedicating the tree to the temple use, that I'm dedicating those things that can be used by the temple. And that means the things that aren't usable by the temple I get to keep. Or, as an alternative commentary says, these little branches weren't there when the tree was dedicated. They grew later. And so I only would have dedicated the tree as it was, and any new growth from the tree, that's mine. That's okay. You see how this works? And the rabbi said, no, the tree is the tree is the tree. You dedicate the tree, or your ancestor dedicated the tree, you're stuck with that dedication. And you don't get to go along and say, well, I'm sure that Uncle Bob didn't dedicate that branch, and he didn't dedicate that branch. That this is a wonderful exercise in lateral thinking and creative problem solving, but you've crossed the line here, and they point out that doesn't work.
And they ate the fallen fruit from beneath the trees on Shabbat.
Okay, so fruit that falls on Shabbat is prohibited to be eaten, right? Because you're not allowed to harvest on Shabbat, even from something that fell off of the tree by itself. However, what if you don't know if the fruit fell before Shabbat, before you got to the orchard? So maybe that apple that's sitting down there was actually a Thursday apple, even though it's under the tree on Shabbat. And again, like the tree here, they said, well, it might have been that really the fruit that fell on Shabbat was prohibited, but the fruit that fell on Thursday isn't prohibited. I'm just late to pick up the fruit, so why can't I have it? And the rabbi said, you don't get to make that call. You don't get to say, oh, it must be Thursday fruit, therefore it's okay. You don't eat fruit that's found under trees on Shabbat. It's just, right? So like I said, rabbis aren't always pushovers. And the last one, we're going to see a really interesting head scratcher.
They gave peah from vegetables.
All right, so what is peah, or peot, if we're talking about the plural?
Edges of the field.
Exactly, the corners, right? That's when we talk about peot, meaning the hair things, we're talking about the corners of our head. And when we talk about peot or peah for a field, we're talking about the corners of the field that are left for the poor. Well, hey, they're giving peah from vegetables. That's above and beyond, right? You don't give peah from vegetables, right? That's not part of the mitzvah of peah. So if they're doing more for the poor,
that the poor can glean from the field.
Yeah, that the poor can go and use these corners for themselves. That should be considered, commendable.
You would think so.
You would think so, unless you think about tithing, right? All produce that is subject to peah, the peah doesn't need to be tithed from.
So they try to deduce taxes.
Well, it's possibly they're trying to reduce taxes, that they're leaving it for the poor rather than using it as part of the overall quantity of food available for tithing. But the other issue the rabbis were really worried about would be that the poor would come and they would eat from the corners, and that corner food or the whole field hadn't been tithed from. So now the poor are eating untithed produce. And that's a problem. Right, that even if you're poor, you're supposed to eat from tithed produce. And That's fine when they're coming from something that has actually been given the dispensation from tithing because it is peah. But if you invent it as being part of peah because you want to, that doesn't override the actual biblical commandment to give the tithe. And so now you've put the poor in a very awkward position where they are eating from something that hasn't been tithed because you extended the law, you extended your perception of peah further than it was supposed to be. And so you end up with this circular problem. So the sages said, look, if you want to take your field, give a tithe, much of which goes to the poor anyway, I should point out, right? Many of the tithing went to the poor, whether it was the actual destitute or whether it was the Kohanim and Levi'im who didn't have land holdings and therefore were reliant upon this for their food. If you want to give poor food, give poor food and do the regular tithing and give them, food either through the tithes or as bonus on top of that. But as soon as you call it peah, you're creating a breach of how the normal tithing process works. And now you're essentially putting the poor in a position where they're going to be breaking the commandment of eating untithed produce. So you're not helping anyone here. There are good ways to do what you want to do. This isn't one of them. And that's, again, an important reminder that just because you're doing good doesn't mean you're always doing it in the right way. And there are often good ways to do good things and not so good ways to do good things. And knowing the difference matters. You can't just say, well, my heart was in the right place, or, well, hey, don't you want them to eat? In fact, we see an example of that very criticism of Rabbinic Judaism found in the Christian Bible. One of the stories of the conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees is Jesus shows up in a town and it's Shabbat, and there are people that are poor and they're hungry, and so he goes out and starts harvesting for them, even though it's Shabbat. And the people say, how can you harvest? It's Shabbat. And he says, but there are people that are hungry. And it's like, well, that's very nice that you're concerned about the poor, and absolutely they should be fed, but we have things called food that we can give them, and that is where the support for them should come from. And come Sunday, come Yom Rishon, the day after Shabbat, we can go out and harvest extra for them and everything. You don't have to break Shabbat to help the poor. We've got 6 days of the week that we can gather and give money and cook for the poor and help them. You don't need to make Shabbat the day you help the poor. Right? And don't pretend like, oh, it's okay that I'm breaking Shabbat because I'm helping the poor, as though this is the only moment in all of human history that you'll be able to help them.
Or as though it's a surprise that Shabbat is coming.
Yeah, exactly.
You did. Plan ahead.
Who knew, right?
Why is this much on Friday?
Yeah, who knew there was going to be Shabbat and that there might be poor people?
Yeah.
Oh, I better go out and harvest.
And on Shabbat, he was being questioned and tempted to see if he would, see if they could catch him in his former shape. And they said to him, they came and followed him, and they saw his disciples picking the corn,
Right, on Shabbat.
and they said, well, isn't this against the Shabbat?
Yeah.
And he said, what would you do if your donkey fell in the ditch? You pull it out
Two different
on
things.
Shabbat. So
Well, the donkey fells, you couldn't predict that, but you knew it was going to be, you could have picked some corn on
And-
Friday for Shabbat.
and he
Right.
quoted something about he quoted something from the Torah back in the I forgot who it is. I haven't read my New Testament in years.
Good.
And it said something. Jesus said something like he quoted something of someone going into the I forgot who it, huh?
David and his people.
Exactly. David and his people going in and eating the bread, the loaf of bread in the temple because they were hungry. Yeah. And Jesus healed people. Well, so
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
at that time he healed.
Yeah, which, by the way, healing is always permitted, and you don't have to violate
and they
Shabbat to do
condemned
so.
him. But see,
So
so what I question about the New Testament is Rabbi Rubinger brought a good point, and it stuck to me since the day that I went through his conversion process. And it was the New Testament always portrays the Pharisees bad, no matter what, and it is very offensive to me. And I have to admit that.
Well, and that's
It's not what he's saying.
No, I know what you mean. Right.
Because
So
it's true.
it's kind of beyond the scope of the Mishnah
Yes.
class, but yes, obviously the Christian Bible needed to portray the Pharisees in worse light than any other group, because the Pharisaic movement was the most similar movement and the biggest competitor for the hearts and spirits of the poor of the time. Remember, the Pharisees were the ones who were moving among the poor and who were working with them and teaching them individual spirituality that was independent from the, let's say, expensive spirituality of the temple, and at the time, rather corrupt spirituality of the temple. So you always find in political or social movements that people get most upset by the person next to them, not by the person who is so far from them that they can't even tell the difference.
But I don't think Jesus was intimidating to the Pharisees. I think he was intimidating to the Romans.
Well, like I said, much bigger conversation than we have for tonight. Okay, but we got another good guy to talk about. As long as we're talking about some things we like and some things we don't like, we're going to go back to our other mostly good king, right? Again, it's important to know your biblical history. We don't get many good kings in Judaism. Right? We've got David, who basically gets an A+ report card. He had a bit of a problem, and he fixed it. But mostly as a king, I know, everyone remembers that about him. But most of his reign, he really did an excellent job of serving God and of serving the people. And so he really is the benchmark against which all of the kings are rated. And then you have other kings that, although maybe personally were loyal to God, didn't always steer the country in the right direction. And then you had the Northern Kingdom, which had only bad kings, which were not personally loyal to God and were also terrible for the country and the people. Among the good ones, who both were personally loyal to God and who helped the country move in the right direction towards God, you only get two after David and Solomon. One of them is Josiah, and the other is Hezekiah. And Hezekiah, who we're going to talk about, and we're going to see, also wasn't perfect. Maybe we'll call him a B. Josiah kind of gets an A- or an A. Hezekiah gets a B. Everyone else, some of them get a C, and most of them get an F. Okay. So Mishnah, we're on Mishnah 9. Yeah.
6 things King Hezekiah did. Concerning 3, the sages agreed with him, and concerning 3, they did not agree with him.
I notice how easy this would be if you were memorizing it.
Yeah.
You get the pattern of the 3 and 3, and then you remember the other 3 and 3, and so now you can keep that part of your brain in one little unit, and it's easier to remember when you're trying to teach.
Is that why this is?
Absolutely. That's why you'll find often digressions in the Mishnah. It's a mnemonic device. It's like, as long as we're talking about this, or as long as we're speaking in this type of pattern, let's put a few more things in the box so that it's easier to remember.
1, he dragged his father's bones, the corpse, on a rope bier, and they agreed with him.
Okay. Sounds terrible, right? For those of you who were here earlier when we were doing the Torah class and we were talking about the burial of Jacob and how he was carried up on this beautiful bier to the land of Israel and buried with all the Egyptian honors and everybody there, the chariots and such. That's how you honor your father, right?
Yeah.
Who was his father? Ahaz, actually, not Ahaz. Right? And he was a terrible, terrible king. Both terrible for the people and terrible for God, as far as being an idol worshiper and just all around rotten person. And so when Hezekiah came into power, he was the exact opposite of his father, and he showed it by showing dishonor to his father for the burial.
But
Now,
this was a problem with the Torah, that you always need to give
Kibud av v'em, honor your parents, right? You would think you should be honoring your parents, even if they are complete and horrible people.
Mm-hmm.
Not when they're this horrible. So yes, I'm sure that none of us here have a parent that is as bad as Ahaz was, right? It's like, he is the melodramatic, twirling the mustache, evil kind of guy. He is the Haman of the kingdom. For that, Hezekiah needed to show the country, we are done with this. And this man doesn't deserve any honor because of how much he destroyed the country, how much he turned the nation away from God. And as a king, there was a different standard than there is for the rest of us. So you're right. For our own flesh and blood, normal non-king parents, we do have to show them a modicum of honor, even if they do bad things, even if they are bad people. We don't drag their body on rope and rope ears. But for this case, the rabbis, and that's why they had to say it, the rabbis agreed that what he did in that special case was right. If everybody had agreed that it was right and that it was obvious that it was right, the rabbis wouldn't have had to speak. They wouldn't have had to said that they thought it was okay. So they are speaking precisely because of our normal reaction that this is not how you would handle the burial of a parent. But in this case, unique case, it was appropriate, or so the sages say.
But did they also try to give an excuse for King Hezekiah? He wasn't really that awful, because maybe this pain that his father was having by being dragged could sort of bring his father atonement for all the evil things he did.
Possible.
And so the Hezekiah, he's still a good guy. He's doing it all right.
Right.
He's showing you that he was a bad king. He's not
Right.
giving him honor, but there might be because
So,
of his father.
so the sages do add in the idea of posthumous suffering as atonement, and that this was a way of helping to affect that.
Yeah,
But we don't go in
no.
generally for posthumous atonement.
No, that's right.
We prefer other ways to honor the memory of the dead rather than to disgrace them as atonement. So
Okay.
it's not
That's
definitely not a model that we follow in any other circumstances.
I'm glad to
No
hear
one
that.
get an idea.
Glad to hear that.
Since you brought up honoring your mother and father and
Mhm.
quoting that, is honoring your mother and father only pertain to the Jews only, or to anyone that reads that? Because you got the Muslims
Yeah.
that are, the parents that teach them to do evil.
Yes and no. The basic answer to the second half, which is what happens if your parents are teaching you to do something wrong, whether you're Jewish or not. If a parent is teaching the child to break commandments, to do evil, they do not have to honor their parent in that way. If your parent says, I want you to go rob a house, you say, I love you, Dad, I love you, Mom, but I can't break the commandment and go rob a house. You're not required to do that. However, if they say, get up out of my chair, even if you think it's unreasonable, even if you're tired, you get up and you let them have the chair. So you do sometimes have to give in to unreasonable demands, but you definitely don't give in to evil commands. Okay, onward.
He crushed the bronze serpent, and they agreed with him.
All right, the bronze serpent. Everyone knows about this, or it's often called the brazen serpent.
Mostly the same one with Moses in the desert.
Exactly.
That he cured when the other snakes beat the
Yep.
people.
You got a gold star. Okay, so back in the book of Numbers, which is read usually during the summer, so a lot of people don't come to shul. And a lot of people don't know this story. I'm just saying, nobody locally, nobody present, but in general, it has been known to happen that people don't always come to shul as regularly during the summer months because they're visiting Israel. It must be.
That's
It must be. But there is a story of one of the many problems that happened to the people of Israel during our trip through the wilderness, through Bamidbar, where snakes were attacking the people and biting the people, and Moses was instructed to make this bronze snake that was then held up on a pole in the middle of the camp. And when people looked up or at it or through it towards heaven, depending upon how you want to read the commentary, they were healed and the problem was over. Okay, so sounds good. Yeah, well, the citation is there, was Numbers 21. Numbers 21, you can read all about it. It's only about 4 or 5 verses long, maybe even less than that. It's not a long story, but it crops back up again in the book of Kings during the reign of Hezekiah. Because what do you imagine might have happened to this? It became an idol. Exactly. I mean, if I'm looking at the bronze serpent and it heals me, then it's got power, right?
And also other people around Israel, they use the snakes also as an idol.
Exactly. This was not the first snake idol that anyone had ever seen. And so during Hezekiah, he destroyed what Moses had made. And that is kind of shocking. I mean, Moses made this thing and you are destroying it. And the answer is yes, that was approved of because it had become an idol, even though that wasn't its original intention. And so he was removing it as a temptation towards idolatry from among the people. And the sages gave him thumbs up for that. Yes, break it. And likewise, or similarly, I should say.
He hid the book of remedies, and they agreed with him.
All right, so this one, we're relying on some of the commentaries to try and help us work this out because we don't know about this except for this. The idea was that there was a book that had various forms of healing practices.
I think the Quanin.
What's that?
The Quanin.
Right, that worked was the idea. And Hezekiah comes along and he gets rid of it. Now, all of us medically minded people would say, well, wait a minute, if we got something that helps people get healing, why wouldn't you keep it around? And the idea that the commentators introduce is that the book itself began to be thought of as being imbued with the power, and that it wasn't a vehicle or an instrument for helping us understand what ways healing could come. It was as though you took your medical dictionary and began praying to it. Oh, heal me, mighty medical dictionary. Gray's Anatomy, please heal me. That you turn to the book as though it is the source of the healing, rather than
idea. I don't.
Exactly. So basically, the book itself became almost like an idol, or the incantations took on the prescriptions took on like an incantation quality. It became like spells, and that is just moving people in the wrong direction. And being healed is nice, but if you are moving yourself towards idolatry in the process, then we need to find another form of healing. And yay, modern medicine.
I don't think it's necessarily, but there's a fine line with that in regards to reading scripture in that way. And where's that line?
You mean in terms of reading scripture as a healing incantation sort of thing?
Not exactly, but it goes towards that. Like the blessing that you receive from the spiritual benefit and the closeness, of walking with Hashem. I feel like I could go that direction very quickly, and I don't know where that line is.
Okay, so it's an excellent question, because indeed it is easy to still slip in the modern world, and it's easy to slip even on Torah and Tanakh, on the Bible. You don't need a book of remedies to have this problem. And truth be told, there are people who sometimes will treat the Torah as a talisman, who will treat a mezuzah as a talisman, as an amulet, as a source of power, as a lucky charm. And that is a real problem. You'll see people saying, so-and-so is sick. We need 100 people to recite Tehillim, to recite the Psalms for them. And that will help their healing. And it comes down to, as we've said many times, intention. If you're reciting the Psalm, if you're hanging a mezuzah, if you are touching the Torah as it comes around the room, if you are saying a blessing for healing, with the intention that the blessing, the hanging, the touching, the reading has a magical effect, then you're heading down the wrong path. If you believe the touching, the hanging, the reading, the being close to, the saying of the blessing is helping you connect to God better and understand better and maybe have insights into what can remedy the situation, then you're okay. Then you're on firm ground. And so you constantly have to ask yourself, do I think that the action by itself will have any effect, or do I think the action will lead me towards God, and through that, there may be some effect? And if you are in the first camp, that if the action is a mechanical way of manipulating reality, you're in trouble.
So it's like the serpent. If you're looking through the serpent to the Shem,
exactly.
then you got it right. But if you stop at the serpent.
Right, which is what the classical commentators say, is that when the serpent got raised, that's a serpent, right? That the people, you could either look at the serpent or you looked through the serpent to God. And if you looked at it, didn't do a bupkis. If you looked through the serpent towards God, and it was a reminder of, Shemaim, of heaven, then you were moving the right direction. But the problem is, as you can see, it's not a huge angle of difference between those two acts, which is why we have to constantly be on guard against that temptation.
Today,
Hold on a second, I've got a hand over here first.
Today, it occurred to me, somebody had told me that there was a mezuzah you could buy to hang on the dashboard of your car.
Yeah, that's not actually a mezuzah. Mezuzah literally means
the
gate, the posts, right?
That's right. the
So
door
unless
posts.
you design your car very strange,
That's right.
it is a object that contains a scroll
Yeah.
upon which the same passages are written
Right.
that are found in a mezuzah. But that doesn't sound so good, so they call it a car mezuzah.
Which seems to be
It's
so
not
strange. It
kosher.
seems to be kind of pagan.
It's not.
Well,
It's not kosher.
it's not something I
it's not.
recommend
No.
because
It sounds like,
well, it's not a kosher mezuzah because it's not being used for the mitzvah of mezuzah,
oh,
and in many ways,
yeah.
if you have the mezuzah there, so that when it's on the dash of your car, you will remember not to swear at other drivers. If you have the mezuzah there, so that you will remember not to cut off other drivers, or not to make rude gestures to other drivers, or to be patient and loving to other drivers,
Love your neighbor.
to be a mensch, even while driving.
While
To
driving.
remember regard the parents of the other driver.
Exactly. If that's why you put it there,
Yes.
then I'm not sure that it's a bad thing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I wouldn't say take it off.
Right.
If you put it there because you said, as long as I have the mezuzah, I won't have an accident,
Oh,
That's
okay.
it.
then you're in trouble.
Right.
Then you're in trouble.
But Rabbi, the statement, the question she asked
Mhm.
about the prayers
Right.
that can turn into
Right, a form of idolatry or incantation, yeah.
From what I perceived from what I understood with her question
Mm-hmm.
is, what happens is from my perception of what I've seen in Judaism, even in Christianity,
Mhm.
okay, is the problem is when they say all these ritual prayers,
Mhm.
they think of the prayer, they don't think of Hashem.
Right,
They
that's-
they forget to meditate on
Right, it's the
Hashem
danger.
himself.
Exactly right.
And Hashem said, don't rely on the blessings, but rely on me, you know?
Exactly. It's you end up worshiping the vehicle rather than the destination, and that is a real danger.
And
And
that's the
and
problem with
everything.
the Chabad.
well, I don't want to point fingers at other groups,
Right.
but it is a problem with human nature.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it comes back to the seduction of idolatry in any of its forms, the subtle and the obvious, which is control, right? When you believe that what you are doing will control the reality around you, it is a very empowering feeling. And it makes you feel like you've got a handle on the world for the first time. And now you know what to do, because if I have this talisman, if I say these special incantations, if I have this special decoration, then my life will be controlled and safe and good and all of that. That's the allure of idolatry in general. And that's also the source of human arrogance, is to believe that we are able to ultimately be in control. And that's why it gets flipped on its head. And one of the reasons why, to bring us back almost to Pesach, why Pesach is so important, where we realize that our redemption and our exodus, although we played our part in it, ultimately was from God's orchestration, not our own.
So what of the situation that someone tell you very often, okay, if everything going wrong in your life, maybe change the mezuzah, the cloth.
Oh, right.
So which category is like in a way to
Yeah.
okay, maybe change the mezuzah, so redirect yourself to God, the relationship, or maybe okay, this is the magic paper that maybe can help and make my life better.
Generally, I don't think that's great advice, because it makes it sound like the only reason bad things are happening is because you have a bad mezuzah, which would seem to imply that God is happy to run you down with the truck if you have the wrong parchment on your door. And that's not really the way God has expressed himself throughout our tradition. God really doesn't cause your life to be miserable because you made a mistake in one mitzvah, even as important a mitzvah as having a mezuzah. On the other hand, yes, if checking your mezuzah helps you refocus your life so that you stop sabotaging yourself and stop making mistakes and stop acting in the world in a way that forgets the mezuzah, then yes, checking them can be helpful. But there are lots of other ways of self-checking, of doing tefillah every day, which someone may or may not be doing well, with the full spirit of keeping other commandments. I would much rather someone check the mezuzah as regularly as they should, because we should check our mezuzahs whether life is going well or not, because it's important to make sure that the cloth is still valid and kosher. But more importantly is to check all of our mitzvot all of the time to make sure we are fulfilling all of them as we should, whether our life is good or bad, because the mitzvot don't promise us a peaceful, perfect, prosperous life. They promise us a life of value and meaning. and those two are not always synonymous. And we hopefully have recognized that as we're just coming up to the end of the book of Genesis, where the life of all of our righteous ancestors was anything but perfect and peaceful and prosperous at all of their times. You can just pick any ancestor you like from the book of Genesis, and there are huge periods of life when things were not good, even when they were being good, even when they were acting as a good person. That doesn't mean they always were enjoying just that wonderful time. So I would like to think that we're all in the same boat, and should be constantly checking, even if things are good and even if things are bad. All right, let's finish these three because we really want to finish chapter 4 tonight.
Concerning 3, they did not agree with him. 1, he cut down the doors of the temple and sent them to the king of Syria, and they did not agree with him.
All right, I cut down the doors of the temple and sent them as tribute. Right? Please don't attack me. Here are the doors to the temple, which were covered in gold. Right? So whether he actually cut down the doors and sent the whole doors and replaced the old ones, or whether he just peeled the gold off and sent it off as cash, as a bribe, is a subject of debate. But the basic idea is he was bribing the king not to attack. And that's a problem because what, you think God won't help you? Right? I mean, if God wants the temple to fall, bribing the king of Assyria is not going to help. And if God doesn't want the temple to fall, then you don't need to bribe and keep the doors the way they are. And indeed, we know that when Sennacherib did finally besiege and attack Jerusalem, it wasn't because of the bribe that he went away. He went away because there was a plague that decimated his army outside the walls of Jerusalem, and he left because he no longer had the power to attack the city. I can see you have a question.
Yes, what about if maybe he did this as a pikuach nefesh, try to save their lives? He said, you know what, they have a God, I can save their lives, so I prefer to give away the God.
Okay.
Why the rabbi didn't see in that way?
So let's do number 2 first, and then we'll handle both of them together, because number 2 is related.
Okay.
He closed up the waters of the upper Gihon, and they did not agree with him.
Right, so this is one of the water sources around Jerusalem, but outside the walls of the city. And by closing up the spring, his idea was, I will make it hard for the Assyrians to have water. Right? An army that's attacking my city, it needs water. And if I can block the spring, then they will have a harder time having a siege because they won't have anything to drink. And sound military strategy in the ancient world. And the sages are criticizing him on both of these cases because ultimately the fall of Israel to one of the great empires had nothing to do with military strategy, because the Assyrians could have destroyed us with or without the doors and with or without the water. They were simply that massive. It would be like Estonia next to Russia. If Russia wants to take Estonia, Russia's taken Estonia. They can tear up all of their bridges. Russia is still going to take Estonia. Right? They could destroy all the dams and flood the rivers. Russia is still going to take Estonia. The only way Estonia is going to survive against Russia is if a miracle happens. And trying to bribe their way out of this, trying to militarize their way out of this, the sages were saying is showing that he didn't really understand the situation. That against Assyria, this was what it was. That against Assyria, Assyria was coming. And we see that Assyria did come. And Assyria crashed against the walls of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem would have fallen if not for God's intervention. And there's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but Hezekiah made it look like there might have been some other way out of the situation. And I think that's what the rabbis were objecting to. But you're right, in general, when the outcome of a war is not clear, then you are expected to do everything you can, up to and including, selling things and fortifying and doing the material things necessary to prepare for war. But when it's Russia and Estonia, what are you doing? You're not going to win this militarily. The only way you're going to win is with outside intervention. That's why the Baltic states all want to be part of NATO and have support from the United States and Europe, because they know they can't beat Russia by themselves. But that's a little digression into modern geopolitics. Okay. And then the last but not least.
He intercalated the month of Nisan in Nisan, and they did not agree with him.
Okay. Lovely topic for more detail another time. Judaism has leap years in our calendar, right, to make sure that Passover comes late. And when we get a leap year, it means we get 2 of the month of Adar, right? We get Adar 1 and we get Adar 2. And you don't decide to have Adar 2 after the month of Nisan, which is the month that comes after, has already begun. Make sure, it's a short point, but it really will probably work better with a little bit of a visualization. Right, you have Adar and you have Nisan. If you're in Adar, and this is back in the days when they would decide to have a leap year in Adar, they would look at the moon and say, wait a minute, where is it in the constellation? Meaning, where are we close to the vernal equinox? How much longer do we have till Passover? Do we need an extra month to make sure that Passover comes later? They're in Adar, they say, we need another month. Okay, so this is now going to become Adar 2, and this is going to become Nisan. That's the normal process in the ancient world. Nowadays, we've printed our calendars hundreds of years in advance. It's all set. We don't have to figure it out each year. But back then, they had to figure it out each year. What Hezekiah did was Adar came, and Adar finished, and Nisan began. And then he said, you know, let's go ahead and make this Adar 2 instead, and we'll make that Nisan. You don't get to move Nisan after it's already begun. It's like, oh, that's right. You thought this was Nisan? Kidding. It's actually Adar again. Like, but wait, we just celebrated Rosh Chodesh. You said it was Nisan. Now you're saying you don't get to do that.
But Pesach was going to come too early.
Well, if Pesach was going to come too early, then the sages would have postponed it with an Adar number 2. So he was doing it for his own reasons, and I'm not privy to the thoughts of the king. But
what happened? No one saw it coming, and they did a mistake, and he tried to avoid a mistake, having Pesach not the correct time. So he tried to save all the people in relation with God. Why going to the negative and not?
Right.
We are humans.
why go to the negative? The very simple answer is because the rabbis didn't approve. It's a little bit of a circular reasoning.
No, I know, but
the short answer.
The problem.
Right. The short answer is the rabbis would have agreed with him if he had been right. And if he had been right, they would have agreed with them. And if they'd agreed with them, they would have been right. It's circular argument, I know. But when the rabbis say they don't agree with something that the king did, it means that they felt that it didn't need the second Adar, but for another reason, he decided to change it. And it's not the king's prerogative, according to Jewish law, to change that. It's the king's prerogative because he has a lot of swords and spears to do it, but it's not the king's place to do it legitimately. And even legitimately, once the month has begun, you have already declared when Passover is going to be. So by postponing it after the month has begun, when the 15th rolls along, that should be Passover. And now you've told me it's Adar 15 instead. So am I supposed to observe Passover or not? As soon as Rosh Chodesh was declared, the 15th became Passover, even if it hasn't happened yet. And you can't retroactively undo it, say the sages. So you're stuck. It's going to be what it is, right? Calling it Nisan makes it so, and you don't get to undo that.
Was it the priests who were supposed to decide?
Well, according to the Chachamim, according to the sages, it's the sages.
But this was before them.
Yes and no. So historically, although the rabbis as a formal group didn't exist at this time, there was a group of learned people, often called the Sofrim, the scribes, who filled the role that the rabbis later took officially, which is to provide wise counsel and proper records of the traditions and implementation of Jewish law.
And they existed back then.
The Sofrim definitely, because we know that from Ezra. That Ezra was a Sofer and he was a scribe and he was part of this tradition. How many of them there were, what authority they formally had, what power they had, that is open to more speculation. But there would have been people whose official job it was to watch the sky, to calculate the equinox, and to know whether or not we needed a bonus month to push Passover past it or not. And that was a technical consideration, not one of convenience, not one that to be made by a political power. And so this was a crossing over the separation, I guess you could say, of church and state.
Just for the record, okay, too late, but I disagree with the decision of the sessions about this. No, about the point of the door, because what happened is we saw in the past that God, let's say, that can help us, but He expected from us to take the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when, what was the guy that crossed the Red Sea?
Nachshon.
Nachshon.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with Nachshon? What, he didn't have trust in God? That a miracle? No. We learn from Nachshon, from the same rabbi and the Rashim, that God expects from us to take initiative, okay? And it's a partnership between God and the people. Well, he was doing the same partnership, the same idea, the same logic that the rabbi itself are teaching, saying, you know what, I try to bribe the other empire, here are the golden, okay, and I know that God will help me, but the partner with God, I try to help and do my part. It's the same logic, so I disagree that now they punish him because he tried to do.
They didn't punish him. They didn't punish him. They simply criticized his decision. Right? So it's not they're saying he's a bad person. They're not saying that he was a bad king. Like I said, he's one of the few that gets a good grade. You know, him, Josiah, and David are the only three that get good grades. Solomon kind of gets a pass because of his dad and because he was a good king at the beginning. You know, he just ended kind of poorly. You know, he did great and he failed the final. So it's okay.
So what's the difference between Nachshon and King? Both of them, they acted in the same logic.
Right.
So why for Nachshon is fine, for King is wrong?
So I think we could argue this a lot, and I think that's an important argument to have of exactly how much do we do and how much do we let God do. And I think on the whole, we generally let God do as little as possible, and we do as much as we can. In the days of Isaiah, in the days of prophets, in the days when there was a clear voice from God, a Navi, an actual prophet, if the Navi tells you, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. We don't have prophets, and so we have to explore every possibility. Secondly, the path that he began by that, where does it end? So Sennacherib says, oh, good, I like your gold. By the way, I hear you have a lovely ark. I'd like that too. I hear you have a menorah. I'd like that too. I hear you have children. I'd like some of them as my slaves. How far do you go to prevent this from going?
Anyway, they need to pay tribute to a different empire. Anyway, they need to send all the time materials for to the other empires.
And we did under the Persian Empire, and then under the Alexander the Great, and under the Ptolemies, and under the Seleucids, and all of that. We did, but they didn't ask us to take from the temple. They didn't ask us to take from the heart of our faith, the center really of our people. And I think that was partly the symbolism that's a problem here. But I think the bigger issue is the Navi. If you have Isaiah telling you, be strong, God will defend you. If Isaiah tells you that, you're supposed to listen to Isaiah. If you're not sure what's going to happen, then yeah, that makes a lot of sense to explore all of the options. And we do still have the same question without the help of a Navi nowadays. In the modern world, if something like ISIS takes hostages, do you pay the ransom to release them, or do you not pay the ransom to release them? Right? It's not an easy question. I know people can give very quick and easy and pounding table answers, but anyone who thinks it's an easy question is not really exploring all of the possibilities of what this means.
Israel deals with this all the time.
More often than she should, unfortunately. Yes.
Israel always pays ransom, and they still keep their hostages.
Yeah, although one who was released quite recently was just wound up dead somehow. A few missiles and boom, gone. So Israel has a way of catching up to people too that are continuing to plan more murderous attacks. So it's hard, and actually, I think we're not going to get to chapter 5 today because we did a great job on just these 3 little Mishnayot of plumbing them in their depth. So read up on chapter 5 in advance because it might make things a bit more intelligible. And like I said, I hope you're not squeamish or a vegetarian.
Oh, darn.
All right, we do have class next week.
I'm going to have to miss it